Imagine, for a moment, the vast, terrifying emptiness of the Pacific Ocean in 1944. We are talking about a theater of war that covers 63 million square miles. It is a blue void where distance is the greatest enemy. In this theater, keeping a human being alive is a logistical miracle. Keeping a machine running is a feat of engineering. But keeping an army happy? That was supposed to be impossible. To understand the absurdity of what I am about to tell you, we have to look at the two men staring at this ocean from opposite sides. On one side, you have a Japanese infantryman on the island of Guadalcanal, or perhaps Peleliu. He is hiding in a cave system that smells of sulfur and rot. He hasn't seen a supply ship in 3 months. His boots have dissolved in the jungle humidity. He is rationing rice down to a few grams a day, supplementing his diet with jungle fern roots and, if he is lucky, a lizard. He is fighting for the emperor, but mostly, he is fighting a losing battle against biology. He is starving to death while holding a rifle. Now, cut to a few hundred miles away. A U.S. Navy sailor is standing on the deck of a strange, blocky ship floating in the Alethi Atoll. The sun is beating down, it is 35 degrees Celsius with 100% humidity. But this sailor isn't sweating from labor, and he isn't hungry. He is holding a paper cup. And inside that cup is 3 scoops of fresh, frozen, vanilla ice cream. This isn't a soldier sneaking a treat. This is industrial policy. This is the story of the Ice Cream Barge, a vessel that shouldn't have existed, built by a nation that had so much excess capacity it decided to weaponize dessert. Today we are going to dive deep into the strangest ship of World War II. We are going to look at the concrete factory that broke the spirit of the Japanese Imperial Army not with explosives, but with sugar, milk, and the terrifying realization of total industrial dominance. To understand why a floating ice cream factory is so significant, we first have to understand the nightmare of logistics in the Pacific. When Japan launched its war, their strategy was based on speed and spiritual strength. They believed that the warrior spirit, Bushido, could overcome material deficiencies. They planned for short, decisive battles. They did not plan for a long war of attrition, and they certainly didn't plan for the American supply chain. By 1944, the Japanese merchant marine, the ships responsible for carrying food and ammo, had been decimated by American submarines. This created a phenomenon the Japanese troops called starvation islands. Commanders were telling their troops to eat grass and drink the rain. On some islands, the starvation was so severe that units ceased to function as military entities and simply became groups of dying men trying to survive one more day. For the Japanese high command, shipping something as frivolous as a luxury item was physically impossible. They couldn't even ship bullets. They couldn't ship penicillin. The idea of shipping ice or sugar was beyond the realm of fantasy. It would be like asking an astronaut on the ISS to order a pizza delivery. Now, look at the American approach. The United States didn't just want to beat Japan, they wanted to bury them under a mountain of material. The U.S. strategy was to export the American standard of living to the middle of the jungle. The U.S. Navy understood something crucial about human psychology. You can take a boy from Kansas, give him a rifle, and put him on a tropical island for a week, and he'll be fine. But put him there for 6 months, with malaria, snipers, and heat, and his mind will start to crack. The Navy determined that the single biggest factor for morale wasn't money, and it wasn't medals. It was food. Specifically, the food they remembered from home. This brings us to 1914. 30 years before the war. The U.S. Navy passed General Order 99, which banned alcohol on all naval vessels. Before this, sailors could enjoy their rum or beer. After 1914, the Navy went dry. To replace the alcohol, the Navy installed soda fountains, known as Gadum bars, on their ships. Ice cream became the substitute vice. It became the flavor of comfort. By the time World War II hit, ice cream wasn't just a treat, it was an obsession. The Navy estimated that ice cream was the most requested item by sailors recovering from wounds. It was the taste of survival. But there was a problem. As the war moved further west, away from Pearl Harbor and toward the Japanese home islands, the supply lines stretched thousands of miles. Small ships, like destroyers and submarines, didn't have the freezer space to store ice cream. They barely had room for the crew. The Navy brass faced a choice. They could tell the sailors, sorry, war is hell, suck it up. Or, they could do something exclusively American. They could build a factory and float it to the front lines. Enter the BRL. The barge, refrigerated, large. This wasn't a converted cruise ship. This was a purpose-built beast. But there was a catch. Steel was precious. Every ounce of steel was needed for aircraft carriers, tanks, and shells. So, the engineers looked at an ancient Roman technology, concrete. They built ships out of concrete. It sounds like it shouldn't float, but physics is on their side. As long as the displaced water weighs more than the ship, it floats. The US commissioned the construction of massive concrete barges. These were ugly, blocky, slow-moving islands of gray stone. They had no engines of their own. They had to be towed by tugboats across the ocean. But inside, they were a technological marvel. The Navy spent $1 million in 1944 currency, that is roughly $15 to $20 million today, to outfit these barges. And the crown jewel of this concrete fleet was the Cream Barge. Let's walk through the specs of this floating factory. It featured a massive cooling plant that rivaled anything found in a major American city. The primary function was to store meat, vegetables, and fruit for the fleet. It acted as a floating supermarket. But the centerpiece was the ice cream manufacturing deck. This barge was capable of churning out 500 gallons of ice cream every single hour. Let that number sink in. 500 gallons. An hour. In a 10-hour shift, that is 5,000 gallons. In a week, they could produce enough ice cream to fill an Olympic swimming pool. The barge carried tons of dry milk powder, sugar, and flavorings. It purified its own water from the ocean. It was a self-contained ecosystem of sweetness. The operation worked like a drive-through. The barge would drop anchor in a secure lagoon, like a Liffey. Then, the combat ships, the destroyers, the cruisers, the PT boats, would pull alongside. They would extend huge canvas hoses or swing cranes over. But they weren't pumping oil. They were transferring canisters of chocolate and vanilla. For the sailors on the smaller ships, this was the best day of the deployment. There are diary entries from sailors describing the sheer ecstasy of holding a cold bowl of ice cream while the tropical sun blazed down on them. It was a reminder that the United States government hadn't forgotten them. It was a reminder that civilization still existed. But now, we have to look at the darker, more strategic side of this. We need to talk about what this did to the enemy. War is not just about killing the enemy's body. It is about killing his hope. Throughout the Pacific Campaign, there was a clash of cultures. The Japanese soldier was taught that the American soldier was soft. They were told that Americans were weak, depraved, and unable to fight without their luxuries. The Japanese propaganda machine insisted that once the hard fighting started, the soft Americans would crumble against the iron will of the samurai spirit. And then, the Japanese started capturing American supplies. There is a famous story, perhaps apocryphal but widely cited, about a Japanese commander who realized the war was lost not when he saw a tank, but when he found an American supply dump. He didn't find just ammo. He found cakes. He found chocolate bars. He found fresh razor blades and unused socks. He realized that the Americans weren't just fighting a war, they were managing a surplus. The ice cream barge took this to a stratospheric level. When Japanese intelligence officers learned about these barges, or when starving garrisons saw Americans casually eating ice cream on the beaches they had just captured, the psychological damage was irreparable. Put yourself in the boots of that starving Japanese soldier again. You have been told your enemy is weak. But you look through your binoculars and you see a massive concrete ship whose only purpose is to make frozen desserts. You realize that your enemy is so wealthy, so logistically dominant, that they can afford to waste fuel, ships, and sailors just to deliver a treat. You are struggling to bring a bag of rice to the front, and they are bringing a floating Dairy Queen. It signaled that the US had infinite resources. It signaled that the US could fight this war forever, with one hand tied behind its back, holding a spoon. This broke the narrative of spirit versus material. You cannot defeat an enemy who treats the war zone like a suburb. The softness of the American soldier wasn't a weakness, it was a flex. It was a demonstration of power. The Navy took this ice cream obsession seriously right to the top. James Forrestal, the Secretary of the Navy, went on record saying, "Ice cream, in my opinion, has been one of the most neglected morale factors of the war." He made it a priority. It wasn't just the barges, either. The obsession spread to the air, too. American pilots discovered that if they mixed milk and cocoa powder in a canister and strapped it to the underwing of their Corsair fighter planes, The high-altitude freezing temperatures and the vibration of the engine would churn the mixture. When they landed after a mission, they had instant chocolate ice cream. Compare that image, a pilot making ice cream on his plane, to the Japanese kamikaze pilots, who were being given a final ritual cup of sake before flying to their deaths. One side is celebrating life and excess, the other is celebrating death and scarcity. The ice cream barge, specifically the vessel known as the Quartz, served throughout the late stages of the war. It followed the fleet. It was there when the preparations for the invasion of Japan were being drawn up. And it represents a turning point in the history of warfare. Before World War II, armies lived off the land. They looted, they foraged, they ate hardtack and salted meat. Logistics was about bare survival. The ice cream barge introduced the concept of comfort logistics. The idea that a military force is most effective not when it is hardened by misery, but when it is supported by the comforts of home. This philosophy carries on to this day. If you go to a major US base in the Middle East or Europe, you will find Burger Kings, Subways, and yes, ice cream machines. The seeds of that doctrine were planted in the concrete hull of that barge in 1944. So, as we wrap up this story, think about the two timelines running parallel in 1945. In Tokyo, the government is teaching schoolgirls how to fight American paratroopers with sharpened bamboo spears because they have no metal left. In the Pacific, the US Navy is mixing tons of powdered milk and sugar, freezing it in a concrete ship, and serving it to teenagers from Iowa. The ice cream barge didn't launch missiles. It didn't shoot down Zeros. But it might